So we've been hearing from platforms and providers behind the scenes that they're starting to field more questions from advisors and planners about bonds. Bonds are one of those products that have fallen out of favour, but they are starting to get more attention what with changes to CGT allowances, and we have started to see this come through slightly in our SOTAN data. So in the context of regeneration then, do we need to make more of these products or perhaps revisit, relearn technical knowledge? For some people in the room, and if you're watching at home, bonds may never have crossed your radar, so regeneration might mean coming to this fresh. So we're going to have a discussion around this stuff, and I'm going to be joined by Gareth Hope from Wren Sterling later to get into it. But before we do get into the discussion, I'd like to give the floor to someone who is far more qualified than me to talk about this stuff. So Ash Kapasi is a tax and trust specialist at Quilter. Change to your scheduled programming. He is not Rachel Griffin. And he's going to provide a bit of context just to get us started, what you need to know if this is a part of market that you haven't really been close to for a while. So please welcome Ash to the stage.
Sit down or stand up. Great, thanks Natalie. As you can see, I'm not Rachel Griffin, I'm Ash Kapasi. I literally didn't know I was going to be here until early this morning. So if my boss is watching, this is going straight on my KPI document. So the theme of today is sort of regenerate. We've certainly seen a resurgence in the use of investment bonds, and there's a number of reasons for that. One of the main reasons is the changing tax landscape that we've seen over the last 18 months, and particularly reductions to CGT and dividend allowances. And what this has meant is that traditional lump sum methods of investing are no longer valid unless we want to start creating tax liabilities for clients. So what we saw in the November 22 autumn statement, Chancellor Hunt's first mini budget, was a reduction in the amount of CGT and a reduction in the dividend allowance as well. So 12,300 became 6,000, £2,000 became £1,000. Now from April this year, the CGT exemption goes down again, halved again to £3,000. The dividend allowance comes down to £500, right? Remember those days when the dividend allowance was first introduced, it was £5,000? Right now it's £500 from April. The CGT exemption and the dividend allowance, those frozen and reducing allowances, because now we do have them frozen until April 2028, mean that assets and tax wrappers that we were using, so namely collectives, general investment accounts, that are subject directly to these taxes aren't as tax efficient as they used to be, right? So why did we stop writing investment bonds? That's the first question, because we used to write investment bonds quite a lot, didn't we? If we go back 10, 15 years. The reason was a change to CGT, right? If you remember, some of you aren't old enough in the room to remember, but if you remember, for those of you who are old enough, CGT used to be the last point of income tax. It was taxed at your highest marginal rate. And then suddenly it became a flat rate, 10 or 20% for basic rate and higher rate taxpayers. So what happened was we had compliance departments telling us, well, once you've done your pensions and your ISAs for a client, collectives should really be considered next because the tax rate is lower than we're getting on investment bonds. And we're starting to see this resurgence in bonds because of, again, a change to CGT. These reducing allowances means, you know, if we were setting up large general investment accounts in the past for clients, and we were doing this, to be honest, to kind of feed ISAs, you know, we saw general investment accounts being set up for £400,000-500,000, you know, for couples. We're trying to get 2 lots of £20,000 a year out to feed an ISA. Not a problem. Don't bat an eyelid when the exemption is 12,300. But when the exemption becomes 3,000, or even now, while it's 6,000, we are going to create CGT liabilities for clients if we continue to do it. So one of the reasons we're seeing bonds coming back is advisors now asking us, well, hold on, if my use of a GIA is more restricted now, what else have I got in my armory that I can use? And the next simplest asset is an investment bond. Right? And so we're having more conversations with advisors about, can I use, say, you know, part of the 5% tax-deferred allowance of the bond to also feed an ISA as well as a general investment account? Well, yes, you can, but then the question is, where's your bond, right? Because if your bond is off a platform and your ISA is on a platform, well, some of that payment has to come back out to the client. clients got to physically put that back into the ISA, right? So you really want, more of the conversation has become about platform functionality, right? Regardless of where your bond is, etc., it's become about, what is your platform of choice and what is the functionality you have on that platform? Can your bond payments go straight to your ISA? Can your bond go straight into your pension? ISAs to pension, bed and ISA, as we used to do. All of that cross-wrapper transfer activity needs to be quite smooth. So do your due diligence in terms of the platforms you're using and make sure that all of this cross-wrapper transfer stuff is easier going forward. So we started to think about bonds. That's the first reason, those changing tax allowances. The second reason is a change to pension legislation, right? Now this is a little bit technical, and forgive me because I'm not a pensions expert, right? But in the spring budget, in March 2023, we saw an announcement that the lifetime allowance is going to be abolished. Now, if the lifetime allowance is abolished, and it is going to be abolished from April, that means we can put more into our pensions again, over and above our old lifetime allowance amounts, but we cannot generate any extra PCLS, right? So the pensions have also become less tax efficient than they were for those clients with really significant pension assets, right? Now, for some clients, the right decision might be to crystallize that pension and take out that maximum PCLS and rehouse it elsewhere for growth. The question then is, where are you going to rehouse it? Because as we saw, the 6 months before that, the changes to CGT, etc., have made general investment accounts not as tax efficient as they were. Ideally, we want to put this lump into an ISA, but we can't put it all into an ISA, right? We can't put it all into a GIA as well without creating tax liabilities. So again, the bond becomes important. And it becomes important because bonds are generally better for trust planning. So trust becomes an issue, right? Why do we need trust? Because we're taking this money out of a pension. We're removing the IHT efficiency of where it was. We want to regain that IHT efficiency. So then a bond with the right type of trust becomes important. So 2 reasons why we're seeing a resurgence in bonds. We've been busy talking to paraplanning teams and advisor teams, re-educating them, I suppose, on the use of bonds, chargeable events, when they occur, etc., how to best take the benefits out of bonds. And that's, is that fair? Is that sort of the same thinking around the room, I guess? Yeah. So I don't know where everyone's left me, but I think that's kind of the 2 reasons for me. I don't know whether to tap dance or do something else. I don't know. Thank you. Yeah, right. Do you want me to stay? Or?
You can stay.
Oh, right, okay.
Thank you for that. That's great. You can stay. Gareth, if you want to sit a bit closer to me, that would be great. Lovely. It's lovely when men do what you say. It's lovely. Right. Thanks ever so much for that kind of context, Ash, and thank you again for hot-footing it across the country to be with us today. So, Gareth, thinking about what we're talking about here, this kind of starting to see an increase in the use of bonds, and thinking about what Ash has just talked about, where do you kind of come in on that? Is that something that kind of you're seeing within Ren Sterling as well?
Yeah, I think, as Ash was saying, there's been a refocus on the use of bonds. Sort of our advisors, our planners and paraplanners are alive to that fact, and are sort of building it into the overall plan for our clients. So, I think it's an evolution as legislation changes, and I think that's it's what we are there for, really.
Yeah, and so let's sort of hone in on Ren Sterling and what you guys are doing, because I think when you kindly filled out SOTAN for us, you said this was something that you were kind of seeing a bit more use of. So if so, what are the things that are driving that particularly?
I think it is the change in legislation, as we said. The change in the CGT made a difference. We've got businesses about 100 advisors. Within that, you get your classic distribution. Some advisors will very rarely use them. Others are using them constantly and always have done. I think it's that group in the middle that are, as I've just said, sort of as the rules change and situations change, it sort of comes back into the planning situation.
Yeah. So I said at the top of this session, Ash, that we were starting to hear more from planners and paraplanners that this was kind of an emerging theme, and also that platforms and potentially kind of providers as well were starting to field more of these questions around, the bonds place in the kind of advisor's toolkit, I guess. Is that something that you guys are seeing as well?
Yeah, we get involved in that discussion all the time, and I suppose from a provider point of view, our house view doesn't really change. If we're accumulating wealth, it should still be pensions first, absolutely. IHT, efficient, tax relief on your premiums, etc. ISAs should come next. And then we can really start to be a bit philosophical about what comes after that. Is it collectives, general investment account? Is it now bonds? Generally, you might still use a GIAs next anyway, but we're not saying that the use of general investment accounts is completely dead, far from it, but we need to take more care in the use of them, because if we use them as we have been, we will be creating tax liabilities for clients. This is the reason bonds have come back into it, but yeah, the sort of view, and as Gareth said, it's still, bonds should still have been used in financial planning holistically, even before these tax changes coming into effect. It's just exacerbated it all. It's just put a spotlight on it, and we really don't want to create tax liabilities for clients. So that's why we're looking for different wrappers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so I guess I'm interested in. I mean, obviously, there will always be policy changes that drive people towards certain products or away from certain products, and I guess we saw a similar thing with annuities when they kind of fell out of favour, and then suddenly people were like, oh, I think I would quite like a fixed income for life and all this kind of thing. So these things do kind of move in cycles, but I suppose there's maybe a wider conversation here around getting that balance right. So you've got your technical knowledge. Obviously, if a product falls out of favour, that knowledge might get a bit rusty, but then it's kind of like, if you've established that knowledge is rusty, it's, I suppose maybe for you, Gareth, it's that sense of then having to bring the team along like, oh no, actually this is important, we need to be on top of this stuff. And that can be quite hard in the day job, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it is a use it or lose it type situation. And
that's a nice allowance joke there.
but yeah, I think you then get, I started in the industry, paraplanning sort of a decade and a half ago. It was common usage, but then fell away. People that have come through the industry in intervening times, will have gone through all the qualifications, learnt it for the exams type thing. That knowledge fades, and if you're not using it regularly. So, trying to get everybody back up to speed on that, whether that's advisors or paraplanners or everybody else in the business, then it's an important part of the job. Yeah.
And so I think there has been a kind of a discussion around the best, I'm going to put this quite crudely, so sorry, but the best kind of skill set mix for planners and paraplanners, because there'll be paraplanners and planners who are client facing and they need to work on those skills. We've seen a new generation of advisors come through where they will focus on the coaching, they will focus on the soft skills, they will focus on perhaps behavioural-led planning. There'll probably be people watching and in the room today who have gone in that direction, and that's all to the good, right? But equally, perhaps have we lost something over here? I mean, this is a question for both of you. Have we lost something in that sort of that technical grounding that when you had perhaps the provider academies of old, that would be the way that you would come through the sector and learn your craft? Has something gone missing there? Do either of you think?
I think a number of providers have pared back their technical resource, certainly, and I think it's because we have less providers that we're dealing with. And generally, we haven't had to have that function available because planning has been, I'm not going to say easy, but it's been quite straightforward. These legislative changes and tax changes have meant that it's put that focus back on us to kind of understand what the changes are, what tax wrappers we have to make the best use for clients, monies to counteract these tax changes. But like I said at the start, we're really busy going out to see advisors and sort of regenning this knowledge, that has kind of been lost, or for the younger advisors coming in, the younger paraplanners, knowledge that they didn't have to start with. They don't really understand bonds, etc., and where they fit into financial planning. But having that holistic approach is much more important than ever before. This, with all these tax changes, sort of tax-proofing clients' plans is really important. And the way to do that is have that flexibility, have all these wrappers available. I think what we're going to see is the use of multiple tax wrappers for more and more clients than ever before, so that we can, pull the right levers at the right time for the right client.
And so I actually wasn't asking the question from the provider perspective, but it is an interesting one in terms of if obviously if the professional interest wanes, then the providers will scale back their support accordingly, and then also now having to sort of not necessarily reskill, but kind of redeploy that knowledge out there. Gareth, kind of from your vantage point, you're kind of with a big national IFA firm. I mean, what do you think about kind of when you're looking across at the sector, whether that balance is right between technical and soft skills, and is that something that you think about within your firm as well?
It's always difficult. The sector is so broad to sort of get a general feeling of it as a single entity. I think I'm a great believer in that products are the last part of the process. I think others have sat on the stage today and talked about the same thing. It's the planning, it's the holistic piece. So I think there is definitely a need for the balance between those soft skills and so those sort of technical skills within it. I suppose with everything, it's about finding that right balance for what you are as a business and for you as an advisor or a power planner within that.
Yeah, and without kind of being offensive, so if you have been in the sector for a while, would you say?
Yeah.
And so have you seen that focus on technical knowledge shift over time, perhaps shift away from?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think it depends on where the focus goes. Fundamentally, I don't think there's a right or wrong piece within that. Fundamentally, as you were saying, actually, the broad use of different products, different tax wrappers, different structures is part of delivering good advice and good planning to clients. So you need to have that grounding. Is my personal view. I think the weighting towards some of the soft skills is absolutely needed because it's delivering the plan. I think it's it does come down to getting the right mix.
Okay. And so if you're somebody who's identified that they do need to brush up on this stuff, where do people go? Is there a kind of a good kind of source for this material, do you think, Gareth? Kind of when you're sort of looking for the really sort of technical, perhaps the provider training of old, where do people go to that now? They'll still go to providers, clearly, but where else might they be going for that
Yeah,
stuff?
so we work with 360 as part of our sort of overarching compliance support as well. We've got an in-house compliance team, but from a tech perspective, we'll sort of lean on the likes of 360, providers, as you say, but actually, as you say, a lot of that's been scaled back in recent times. And so it is harder now, I think, in terms of trying to find the right support when it's needed.
And I suppose that kind of plays to your point, doesn't it, Ash, about if providers have scaled back the support and now people are identifying that they need it, where do people go?
Yeah, I mean, providers still do provide that level of support, so it's still a useful place to go. Your first port of call should be, the consultants that call on you for that technical support. They will have that, or they'll have resource to it. How that's accessed is different across different providers. We have obviously field-based teams. Some providers don't, but they have technical resource in the back offices. Also, in terms of the soft skills stuff, I'm going to drop the C-bomb now and say consumer duty. Right? But
We've got so far.
So the thing is, the starting point has to be the client, more than ever before. So questions around what we're trying to achieve for these clients, and that's the starting point. So that then sort of will filter through to exactly what questions we need to ask a provider, what resource and technical support we need from providers as well. But the client is a starting point for everything now.
Okay, great. So if you have questions at home or in the room, just let me know. I'm going to take a couple of them now. So one question we have is probably just a bit of a technical teaching question, but both of you can answer this, I'm sure. What factors do you consider when deciding the type of bond to use for a client, i.e. between onshore and offshore bonds?
Yeah.
That's a you.
I can probably answer that.
I'm sure you could do it too, Gareth.
As I've just sort of said, it really comes down to the client scenario. We used to see a lot of onshore and offshore bonds written. We're starting to see more sway, I suppose, towards onshore bonds. And the reason for that is, again, something around pensions. If we think about wage earnings last year and the way triple lock works, right? So from April, the basic state pension is going to increase. to about £11,500. So that's 91% of our personal allowance used. What that means is that, you know, it's not inconceivable in a couple of years we may be at a point where the basic state pension is equal to our personal allowance, right? Or above, right? For the first time ever, we may have pensioners paying back basic state pension in tax. So if we're using all these assets that we've talked about for ourselves, we probably need an onshore bond more because we want basic rate tax kind of dealt with, right? But again, it all comes down to the client scenario. If we know that somebody is completely going to be a non-taxpayer in early retirement, offshore bonds will make more sense. It also depends more, I suppose the question more now is not what type of bond it is, but does the bond, you know, what platform functionality and what functionalities does the bond give you? Another reason we used to write offshore bonds a lot was to access different types of funds. We want to use open architecture bonds to access DFMs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we can access all that on onshore bonds now. So a lot depends on what platform you're using, what functionality the bond provides. That's probably more important than what type of bond it is these days.
Okay. And I think for you, Gareth, is it fair to say that you've kind of seen an increase in usage across both onshore and offshore, or not?
Yeah, no, yeah. I think that's fair. You know, it's still probably more weighting towards offshore currently. But yeah, definitely sort of seeing start of a return of onshore bonds usage.
Okay, great. Can Ash and Gareth comment on the traditional view of investment bonds often having higher setup costs, e.g. compared with GIA, and also having a lower range of choice in underlying investments? Also, the time restrictions for clients on accessing the entire investment compared with GIA. So that was 3 questions in one. I'll come to you first, Ash, but then I might come to you, Gareth, just to get your take.
No, all good.
Yep. Again, it depends if your bond is on a platform or not, if the bond that your bond of choice is on a platform or not, and what the platform functionality is. Having a really fully integrated bond on the platform is absolutely key. And if you have that, you can have all the same funds in the bond that you have on your ISA, your pension, your GIA, etc. It's not that much of an issue anymore. And also the extra cost, well, it's a truly platform-based onshore bond or offshore bond. So there's no extra cost for having that bond, right? It's just platform cost. And again, sort of related to platform functionality, having all these assets in the same place means you might benefit from other platform benefits, such as family linking and, you know, aggregated costs and that kind of thing. So, yeah, we're coming away from that. You know, we used to see life funds only for investment bonds. Now, you know, we can access the same range of investment funds that we may be using across all our other wrappers.
Okay, great. And Gareth, what about you? So that sort of sense that bonds were, you know, higher cost, more complex in the underlying investment, there's restrictions around when people can access. Do you feel like, as a firm, you're recommending them? So have you kind of overcome those somehow, or are they still there, those kind of traditional concerns, I guess?
I think they're still there for particular use cases, and it is always a balancing act. I think from the majority of our usage, it is more platform-based bonds. From a full disclosure perspective, our primary platform is Aviva, so we've been badgering them for a year to sort out their bond position. So it was nice to see that last week. But yeah, so it's about finding the right home. But yeah, so we are more and more leaning on platform-based solutions across platforms.
Fine, okay. This one is more of a comment than a question, but it'd be worth kind of speaking to. So there's always this idea kind of in any tax conversation that the tax becomes the focus. And so somebody's kind of made this point that obviously everybody's thinking about tax all the time. That's why it's kind of planning. But there's also this sense that you shouldn't let, you know, the tax tail wag the investment dog, isn't it? So it's not necessarily, I shouldn't say this to a tax specialist, but it's not necessarily tax first, is it?
No, not at all.
It's kind of client first, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, and it comes down to that specific client scenario again, you know. So if you have, let's say, so all these tax changes, you know, to CGT, etc. We talked about, you know, creating tax liabilities where previously we didn't. It doesn't mean we need to avoid that necessarily, because the underlying tax rates, particularly on CGT and dividends, is still quite low. So let's say you've got a client who has just retired and is a basic rate taxpayer and is already used to doing self-assessment, etc. You know, why not still have a general investment account for that client? the tax they're going to suffer on gains will be 10%. It's still lower than you're going to suffer, even with a non-shore bond. So introducing a bond to that client might be introducing a new idea. There's a lot to be said with what a client is already familiar with. But again, we're starting with the underlying client, right? What they're already used to, what they're not, and we are looking at tax, I suppose, there, but it's not always about the tax.
Okay. And I suppose there's a sense of bonds being an old school product. So one question we've had here is around, is there any innovation in this product area that actually we're seeing coming down the track?
Yes. I mean, we've talked about platform-based bonds. I think that's the next stage. So regardless of whether that's an onshore bond, some platforms will prefer, or an offshore bond, some platforms will prefer, the functionality of that is increasing. Like you said, Aviva about to launch a bond onto their platform. Other platforms have already got these bonds in place. Same funds available across wrappers, no extra cost for having these bonds. We do think about bonds as being old-fashioned, but we are modernising. We are regenerating bonds, if you will.
Nice. Okay, perfect. I'm going to probably ask, I think this is the last question now, but that piece around, so the bond specific discussion, I might just park that for now, but that piece around soft versus technical skills and the sort of the role of CPD within that, perhaps if I come to you first, Gareth, and then you, Ash, is there a sense of maybe CPD for all the kind of perhaps the ways that CPD is regenerated and evolved? Do you think that sort of training and kind of competence around some of this stuff, do we need to go a bit more back to basics and back to the fundamentals, do you think, on a kind of looking across the piece?
In a rather sort of potentially controversial way, I think yes. I think CPD is often seen as a tick box exercise. How can I get my 35 hours and what have you? I think returning to a different sort of more focused basis of it would be beneficial for everybody. I think it's a split between those soft skills, those sort of more technical skills. I think that would be the way to develop CPD and just sort of help, again, that my use it or lose it type scenario, just help keep people at a better level across everything, really.
Okay. And what would you say about kind of CPD going back to basics, Ash?
Yeah, we've seen lots of requests to go back to basics. Look, haven't done a bond for a number of years. I think I might have to start thinking about bonds again. Can we come and do some training? So, we've organised lots of training sessions for advisors up and down the country, and this tends to look like, first session might be why we're talking about bonds again and introducing these tax changes, the need to have more wrappers. Then we might get into the technicals of bonds, what chargeable events are, when they occur, etc., life fund taxation, how that works. And then look at uses of bonds, client scenarios, use of trusts, that kind of thing, why we use bonds in trusts where we can. So the CPD is, it's important, and we can offer CPD for those sessions, and we've done a lot virtually via Teams, etc., and we've done a lot face-to-face, so it really depends on what you want, but there's a lot of appetite for this out there, and we're busy doing this all the time. I think technical knowledge is, you can't replace it, you're going to need that technical knowledge, but we're here to support.
Okay, perfect. Gareth, was there anything you want to add?
No, I think we're all good.
Perfect. All right. Please thank Gareth and Ash. Thank you.